Thank you, Darren. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Scott. How you doing?
Very well, Bree. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. This is very exciting. Great opportunity. I'm looking forward to visiting today.
I am as well. I'm excited to dive right on in. For those who might just be hopping on, we are talking with Scott Petersen, credible entrepreneur and leader of entrepreneurs. He's a 6-time business owner and a startup expert. So we have so much to learn today, and I'm very excited. Scott, I'd love to dive right in. Broadly, what is leadership and what does it mean for a startup?
So, to me, leadership is sort of almost everything in a startup. When I think of all the challenges and the problems and the opportunities and the things that we don't know, the things that we're trying to learn, leadership is at the center of all of it. And for example, we can think of what we're experiencing right now with COVID-19, what we've been experiencing for more than 2 months now. I remember back in 2008, just before the meltdown of the economy that was tied to real estate. I was talking to one of my friends, a CEO of a $14 billion conglomerate. And as we were talking and having lunch, he said, "You know, Scott, there's really no one that knows exactly what to do during this time. The only people that really do are the people that lived during the Depression, and they're all dead. And so what we're facing right now is really difficult. And I would say that this is even more complex and more complicated than 2008. And we have some interesting times ahead, I believe. And so I think leadership will strike at the core of how companies prosper and succeed, or in fact, if they don't."
Interesting. So moving on from that, what role does key decision making play in a startup, especially during this time as we need new strong leaders in companies as we come through this recession, everything? What role does key decision making play in startups?
So let me go back first, before I address that question, let me go back a little bit more into leadership
Okay.
in general. I like to think of leadership first as establishing our why. Why do we exist? Why do we have the right to exist? And when we think about that question, does what we're saying resonate with everybody else, not just us, not just our team? We were talking about TikTok earlier on, and although there's always going to be some naysayers in just about anything, look at the conglomerate of people that are resonating with their why. Another thing that great leaders do, and that leadership is all about, is establishing strategic direction. This is one of the key roles of a decision maker. I always like to say that strategy is the craft of the warrior. And when we think about strategy, when we think about how we're going to move forward, that's the key role of a leader. And a lot of times leaders falter in establishing that. Another thing that I think is really important is being intentional about building culture. We have entered a time over the last few years where it seems like companies were fighting to see how many perks that they could give everyone, whether that was food or whether that was time off, or whether that was paid leave for fathers, not just mothers. All kinds of things they were fighting to be the first and leading out in. But really, those things are all, as important as they might be to many people, they're a little bit more superficial and not as authentic as genuine leadership that is building a culture that attracts people to come, and that attracts people to thrive, and that attracts people to stay. And so one of the things that I always think about in that regard is vision. So I'll give you an example, Bree. 10 years ago, when I came to the Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology, and I had done this for each one of my companies, we established a vision statement. And that vision statement was that we lead in developing successful, I'm sorry, that's our new one. That we, to be the leader, to be the global leader in successful campus-inspired entrepreneurial ventures. That was our vision statement. And everything that we did was built around that vision statement. And, you know, we began to achieve it with so many startups that were coming out of BYU in sort of a systematic way and not a one-off way. And it led us to a place that we both liked and didn't like. What we liked about it is that we were creating just large numbers of successful companies. What I didn't like about it is that sometimes they got so caught up in their startup that they forgot about their family, they forgot about their faith, they forgot about things that actually, in the end, you know, when we begin to look back on our lives, will we say, you know, that the most important thing we did was how much money we made, as opposed to the type of person that we actually became through the process. So we changed our vision statement to say we lead in developing successful entrepreneurs of faith and character. So with a vision, you have to also buttress that vision by your strategic direction. So we call those strategic imperatives. For the center, there became 9 of those strategic imperatives. Each of those imperatives were undergirded by 3 or 4 strategic objectives. And then each of those strategic objectives were undergirded by several tasks. Whenever we were able to complete all of the tasks surrounding a strategic objective, then we were able to say, we've accomplished that. And once we had accomplished the 4 or 5 strategic objectives that were tied to a specific strategic imperative, then we were able to say that we accomplished our strategic imperative. And the idea was that upon completing all of the strategic imperatives, that we could say that we had successfully completed our vision. We could even move on to new and greater things. So great leaders have to create that vision, and they have to create those imperatives and objectives and tasks that actually lead the company forward in an efficient way, because the time doesn't wait for anyone, and it's the survival of the fittest out there. The companies that are thriving out there today are the ones that are doing those things well.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about values in startups and in companies and with leadership?
Yes. So the importance of values are that lots of times people create the values, but then they stop talking about them. The same thing happens with the vision. The way to make that effective is to plaster it everywhere and to make it a part of every meeting, to ask ourselves if we really are becoming those things that we say we're going to be. Otherwise, it's not really authentic. So it's getting the whole team engaged. If leaders alone are developing the strategic direction and the vision, the imperatives and so forth, then they're entering into an area of, you know, where they're making a big mistake. Even though leaders have to lead, and as we'll talk about, we're not trying to create a 3-chair barbershop, you know, where we're leading by committee. On the other hand, if we're not getting the input from all of our people, then we're really missing the boat in a big way, in a huge way. And so values are one of those things, and there can't be so many that it becomes an impossible task. You can actually go out to a lot of the great companies and look at what those values are for them and see how they translate into what's meaningful for you and for your team. But values and vision allow us to grow the company with alignment with our values. And if we don't do that, then we find ourselves wandering into the weeds, and we're not going to achieve the success that we're hoping for.
Sorry, I just had to write that down. Values and vision allow us to grow our companies with alignment. I love that. What role, can we go back to decision making?
Yeah, this is one of the areas that I think leaders fail in more
Okay.
often than they would like to think. So decision making is tough. There are some people that naturally they make decisions and they're not concerned about whether or not they're right or wrong. They simply need to make decisions and move ahead and not be paralyzed. So there's a balance, I think, that we try to strike as startup leaders, where we try to be as educated as we can. We try to get all the information that we possibly can get, but then we actually make decisions. Right, wrong, or indifferent, we make those decisions. And as I talk to lots of CEOs all over the country, I can tell you that this is something that they value more than almost anything: the ability to make decisions. Some people naturally have a hard time making decisions. So I'm going to liken this to selling. I'm going to bring it down to a level even as simple as, somebody's spouse, whether that's the man or the woman, whoever takes on that role, in the home at the time, and they say, "What do you want to have for dinner?" And then, I used to do this with my wife. My wife would say, "Honey, what would you like for dinner?" And I'd say, "Well, really, whatever you'd like to have. It's fine. Anything will be great." And that is not the answer that she's looking for. She wants me to help her make that decision. And so in selling, we often, use an alternative choice. And I could say, well, what's going to be a little bit easier, having hamburgers tonight or whatever other kind of dish? And so decision making is all about creating, the options. So when we go down the road of making decisions and we gather information and we look at the various decisions that we could make, what decisions are going to bring us the results that we're looking for in the best time? Getting buy-in from our team, but ultimately the leader has to make the decision. So I like to think about decision making as from a CEO point of view as, this is the direction that we're going to go. And having gotten the buy-in, having gotten the information, and selling the team on the direction, and then but making that decision. So one of the things that often happens, though, Bree, is that as we're making decisions, even with our best information in a startup environment, we're going to get it wrong. Happens all the time. And so we simply learn from our mistakes, and we go through the same process of gathering more information, learning from the past mistakes, and charting a new course. One of the things that I think has served me super well over the years was abiding by a statement that me and my early partner used all the time: let's get it about right on time. So we're not going to, take a long time to make decisions because, frankly, Bree, we're never going to have all the information. It just doesn't exist. If it did, everybody would be out there doing it. And so we're actually discovering the answers to unknown, untried, untested, and unproven business ideas or models. And then we're discovering those answers as we go, by making decisions, by making mistakes, by learning and going forward, and by increasing the speed at which we make those decisions and act, so that we can eventually get, as I say, cross the River Jordan and into the promised land.
We love to get to the promised land. I love that.
Yeah.
I love the let's get it about right on time. Take action, make a decision. There will be some wrong decisions, but can we talk about tough decisions and how to handle making tough decisions with grace and humanness and candor?
Yeah, that's excellent, Bree. Over the course of anyone's career in leadership, you're going to, and I'll tell you some of the decisions and some of the circumstances that people are facing today. I know companies have had to face layoffs with COVID, and that's really tough because every single employee, every single partner, every single associate, they're important. They matter. And at the end, most leaders will learn that it's not they who built the company, it's the team that built the company. It's each individual player. Valuing those people, those resources is a huge mistake. Therefore, when we come to situations where we have to determine that, to survive, we have to make some cuts. How we treated people along the way, along the journey, how we valued them, really, how we involved them, really, how we helped them to feel comfortable and to be a part of the team and comfortable in really delivering their full value. That is part of, a leader's important job. And if and when they have to come to the point of such a tough decision, letting somebody go and knowing the impact that that likely is going to have on their lives, they will have appreciated, and so will all of the team, and the morale that will follow the process and the journey by which that happened. I've talked to so many leaders, and I've talked to so many of those who've been let go over the last several months. Interestingly, from the point of view of those who have been let go, who was let go and why they were let go, as opposed to others who stayed. And a lot of times there was a lot of criticism by many of them about people that remained were not always the best. And it's sort of like a head scratcher. So I would really invite you as leaders to contemplate that by, yes, we got to make a tough decision. But how do we make this non-political? How do we make sure that those who survive, because in my company, Omadi, we've had to do the same. But really, we only ended up letting go 6 people. And we treated those people well enough over the last period of time that when they were let go, they just simply said, well, you know what, we actually saw this coming. We knew that, changes were going to have to be made. And even, I don't know how many of them would have really admitted this, but, some of them were probably saying, I wish that I would have, been just a bit more committed, during this period of time. Nevertheless, they were still important. They were still loved. They were still valued. The pain was real. We helped them to feel that it was painful, that it was genuine. And so that's where grace and candor and humanness come into play. That's only one example of tough decisions that have to be made. Tough decisions can also form around strategic direction, and where there might be not full agreement by every player on the team. And that's where, good leaders help the team to understand why they're going the direction that they're going and getting buy-in from the team.
Thank you for that. And I love the piece where you mentioned how we treat people along the way and how we value and involve them is an important job as a leader. Thank you for that. I think that's really important. I think that's a great lesson. So thank you for providing that. What does it mean to say leadership in a startup? Wait, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. What does it mean to say leadership in a startup must be a benevolent dictatorship?
Bree, this is one of my favorite ones, actually. A lot of young startup folks get this wrong because they try to build it by committee. And one of my favorite teams, which I won't tell them, I won't call them by name or anything like that, but they decided they wanted to lead the company as a committee. And all that really does is paralyze you. It makes you take longer. I call it taking 2 hours to watch 60 minutes. Um, I know a lot of young people don't watch 60 Minutes, and frankly, I don't either. But you can see the sort of the humor in don't take 2 hours to watch 60 Minutes. And when you lead a company by committee, that's what tends to happen: is you take too long to get there. In the startup world, you'll get run over and you'll get passed over. I was laughing sort of when I was watching the earlier training session of the tombstones of companies like MySpace and others. Companies that failed to really catch on to where the market was going, taking too long to shift, and they found themselves irrelevant. And that's what will happen to people who take too long to make decisions. So you have to have a strong CEO. You have to have a benevolent CEO. You have to have someone that truly is a servant leader, someone who really, really does genuinely care about the people, more than he cares about or she cares about himself or herself. They have to care about the people that they're serving. This isn't about the person as the CEO being in the limelight and holding the spotlight. That is the worst kind of leader. The best leaders are the ones that step back, put their people in front, who value those people greatly, involve those people greatly, but still they're a strong decision maker. And it is indeed a benevolent dictatorship. They have to gather all the information and then be able to say, I've heard all of you, and I appreciate all that you said and how everyone has contributed. And based on that, we've come to a decision that this is the direction that we're going to go. And the reason we're doing it is this, this, and this, and inviting everyone to be on board. And when a servant leader has gone about that in the right way, everyone jumps on because they know that they've been valued, they've been treated well, and they are working with a servant leader, and they're happy to then, join in and follow the decision that's been made. You just can't be paralyzed by leading the company by committee. That's a mistake. You have to have a strong CEO.
Along with that, great leaders, CEOs, are well-rounded. What does that mean and look like for a startup?
This is really an interesting one because, we've heard about being a jack of all trades, a master of none. We see leaders that were great technology people or great sales leaders or great marketing people. Maybe they're great operators or finance people. The fact is that a great CEO tries to become as well-rounded as they can. So, for example, if you really don't understand the sales side, how will you know if your sales team is behaving correctly? If you don't know something about marketing and branding, how will you know if your company's behaving correctly? If you don't know something about finance, if you don't know about income statements and cash flow statements, if you're not really familiar with those, how will you really lead the company by data and make decisions that will be helpful? So I guess the bottom line is, Bree, I think that it's really important for a CEO to be as well-rounded as possible. One of the weaknesses that I had early in my career, and perhaps a little bit throughout it, was that I had a deficit, of understanding of technology. So one of my companies, I trusted my co-founder and didn't do enough diligence in the platform that we eventually chose, the code base. And I learned a lot from that experience. But most of all, I learned how important it was for me as the CEO to know technology better than I did. And so that's what I mean by being well-rounded. It'll save you from making lots of mistakes, costing you lots of money, and taking far more time than is needed. So I recommend that everyone go through the process of becoming well-rounded and knowing enough about each of the important areas of company building and being an expert in one or two, to be sure. As the CEO, that's really helpful to guide the company in the right direction.
Why are great startup leaders also generally great sales leaders?
This might sound self-serving because that's how I started my career, Bree. And I led my first company that I first worked for. In 5 months, I was the top sales person in the company out of about 225 reps across the country. I was the youngest. And it wasn't because I was the most experienced. There were a lot of other factors. But to the question of why sales is so important to the CEO, everything that happens inside of a company happens because you can sell something. Of course, before you can sell something, you have to create the right product. That's why, in the build stage of building a company, I actually put the emphasis on building out your product so that the product is so powerful that people love it, and that the onboarding process is amazing so that people are getting the customer happiness that they are paying for. And then I generally look at marketing and branding first, or marketing because I need to fill the pipeline so that the salespeople have something, leads to go out there with. And then finally, not finally, but fourth would be sales, and then team building. But I think about how selling interfaces every single part of the company. From when you're an early stage company, you don't have salespeople. So who's out there selling? Yeah, it's the CEO. And if the CEO isn't very good at it, it's a problem. If the company has to make pitches to investors, and I think of two significant earlier ones in my career. After I'd successfully sold a company and I was building other companies, I made a pitch back in the Midwest. It's called Invest Midwest, and all the venture firms from probably 10, 12 states surrounding were there. And I was probably the least technical, but I could sell and I could present. And so we were, one of, 19 out of about 1,400 submissions. And one of the teams that got picked, the CEO was a doctor and very technical, but he's a terrible salesperson. So he never got company funding. I had another scenario happen when we were struggling to survive as a company, a new company, and I was pitching to a group in the Midwest called Prairie Angels. And after my presentation, they said, "Scott, honestly, this is the best presentation that we've had, period." It was a group of angel investors led by the founder of Kohl's, the department store, which of course was super meaningful back in the year 2000 because department stores were still a big deal then. But at any rate, so you've got to be great to sell investors. And then you have to be great at attracting employees. And so when you interview and sell your employees, that's a continuing, it never goes away. In fact, it's not just selling them initially to join, it's selling them to stay. This could go on with selling your family about, choices that you have right now for this brief period. It won't be forever, but, can we work together, for the next 2 years and have it be kind of a big sacrifice. Anyway, selling comes into play all over the place. And I think a lot of company leaders haven't taken enough time to become experts in selling. So I think that's a big one.
That makes total sense. And I agree with you. I think another role that CEOs play as far as sales go is selling employees to believe in the company and to stay with the company, which kind of leads into our next question, which is, how do great leaders attract and lead great talent?
So I call this the art of hiring tens. So if somebody is only a 7 as a leader, they will never hire somebody more than a 7. So leaders have to learn to become 10s, and that is a combination of everything that we've been talking about and many other things that we haven't talked about or won't have time to talk about today. But I will say that if you are not seeking to become a 10, and then we all have blind spots. Every single one of us have blind spots. Being aware of those blind spots and then working to correct those blind spots, to understand them, to become more effective in those areas. Sometimes our greatest strength can be our a significant weakness, and so we have to learn to keep the strength, but to mitigate the weak side of that particular strength. At any rate, I think that it's super important for leaders to be able to work diligently at becoming a 10. And then they'll have the opportunity of attracting those 10s. Also, I'd say don't ever be afraid of hiring somebody that's better than you are. In fact, I pride myself in hiring lots of people over the years who I think were more talented than me. And but working with them in such a way that they knew their value, they knew how I valued them, and I proved it over and over, not by words that I spoke, but by actions that I took. And then you can get them and you can keep them, and they will build your company. And I think it's important, to treasure those people along the way, those 10s that we attract, and make it worthwhile. One of my favorite CEOs does this super well, is very generous with his people, not having the opinion or the attitude that, hey, this is mine, all mine, I created the idea. No, in fact, this guy says, and I have tried to follow this trend, it's no fun winning alone. And so we have to make sure that our people are rewarded along the way. But to attract great talent, you have to be that kind of person that people want to be around, work with, and that they believe that you're the person that will, as I said earlier, take them across the River Jordan and into the Promised Land.
I love that. I love that. It's no fun winning alone. I agree. What type of leadership or leader works best in an early stage company? As a leader, what is your presence in the company worth?
It's one of my sort of favorite things to talk about, actually, in leadership. Now, let's talk about early stage leadership first. So early stage leadership is different than what your company will look like down the road and how you will lead that company down the road. One of my favorite books that I've taught this for a long time, but I've never written a book about it. And I read a book, that kind of talked about this, called Startup Leadership. And it goes through the various stages of leaders that as the company progresses. So in an early stage company where you're still building out your product, you don't yet have a lot of customers or employees, it's really about project leadership. You're building a product. So can you work with your team and drive results with your technology team who's building your product and become a fantastic project leader who is not only driving the company to do it fast, but to do it right. So I think that being able to identify what stage you are as a company and what type of leadership is needed at that particular time is really important. So an example of this is that we've been using now for about 10 years. I introduced at Brigham Young the Lean Startup. We were the first university in the world to fully adopt lock, stock, and barrel the Lean Startup. Not that the Lean Startup is perfect. Nobody agrees with that. I don't agree with that. But it is, the best framework combined with other frameworks for startup leadership and building a company. So how did they used to do it? Well, universities would teach that a startup was like big business's little brother. And the fact is they weren't even in the same universe, let alone the same planet. And that's why they failed at training entrepreneurs and almost felt like entrepreneurs couldn't be trained, that it was more of a gift, more of a natural, what you were born with. And I just don't believe that. I believe that you can learn how to be an entrepreneur and be a successful entrepreneur, and that it's not one size fits all or one type of personality. I've seen lots of successful people all across the spectrum. So what we are in a startup is we're discovering the answers to those, as we said earlier, to those business models that are unknown, untried, unproven, untested, and we're trying to find those answers. It's basically, what is it that we don't know? And I like to emphasize that, what is it that we don't know, and then know it. And that they say, well, that's easy for you to say. And I say, well, yes, that's it. That is easy for me to say. And it's the price of a startup. If you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to face the challenges head on and go straight through the middle of them. And that is to find out, first of all, have the wisdom with your team to analyze and understand what is it that you don't know, and then to know it. And you keep wrestling those problems to the ground until you get the answers, and you're relentless, and I mean relentless, about finding the answers to those unknown, untried, untested, unproven things. And in the answers lies your success. So I think that for startup leaders, that's what they're trying to achieve. Now, I always like to say this. I read this. I'm a student of history. Anyone that knows me well knows that I love history. I love philosophy. And I've spent years reading really a few thousand books. And my library shows it. I did a full circle turn here in my office. And one of them is, was what the Duke of Wellington said at the conclusion of the Battle of Waterloo, where he defeated Napoleon. And he said that Napoleon's presence on the battlefield was worth 40,000 soldiers. So to my students over all these years, and to all the people that I've mentored, is, what's yours? What's your presence worth inside of the company? Is it worth 40,000 soldiers? Will they follow you into battle? Will they fall on their sword for you? Will they absolutely, when you start to speak direction, say, yep, I'm on board. Why? Because they know your character, because they know your vision, because they know your talent and your well-roundedness. They know and believe in the vision that you conveyed, and they're just going to follow you. Not because you're better than they are, but because they trust you. They trust you to take them to that place where the company needs to go. And they trust their family's livelihood, with you. So that's what I think great leaders do. And it's something that you'll be thinking about you know, if you're 30 years old today, you'll be thinking about it when you're my age, double that many years, and you'll be asking yourself, you know, what's mine? What is mine? What do I need to do?
We are kind of in the middle of a worldwide crisis. How do great leaders inspire during a crisis?
This is really one of my most favorite things as well. You know, I remember in my second startup, we had run out of money. This time, probably a couple times. Ultimately, it was like 5 times. And I remember 2 of my original founding partners, not entrepreneurs, but people who were with Ernst & Young. They wanted to start a company, but they really didn't understand the challenges of starting a company. They expected it would be smooth and great and nice. And I started this company back in January of 2000. And this was at the sort of near the beginning of the end of the internet bubble, as it was called then. And, you know, there were crazy valuations and crazy business models and untested things and lots of money thrown at the internet and companies that were coming out of it and things that didn't make sense. So we signed our definitive agreement on about February 27th, 2000. The letter of intent, the irrevocable letter of intent for this venture group to back us. And on March 13th, we actually signed that. That's when we created the agreement. February 27th, we created the paperwork surrounding that, memorializing that agreement on March 13th. And then we actually closed the definitive agreement on April 13th, a month later. That was the day that the tech market dropped 318 points, the NASDAQ, and was the beginning of the end of the internet bubble, which caused the recession of 2001. So we got the first $1 million, and the group came to us and said, we're not going to fulfill the rest of it. And rather than having you sue us, we'll give you the $1 million for no equity, but you know, you have to sign this agreement going forward. Well, we knew we weren't going to get the money anyway, so we signed the agreement. About a month later, 2 of my key employees, they raided our bank account and left us with almost nothing in the bank account, and then said, sue us. And basically, you know, that's a crisis, anyone would admit, right? And so standing up in front of the company, I was actually on vacation, my 20th year wedding anniversary. I had my wife in Paris, France. Good place to be, but not when that's just happened to your company. But I came back, I stood in front of the entire company, and I said, this is a setback indeed, but I promise you that we will raise the capital. We're going to continue and build this dream. And one of the people that came to me that was key, and he said, Scott, the other 2 people promised me $10,000 bonus when we did X. And so I said, if they made that promise, I'm going to keep it. So out of my own checkbook, I wrote him a $10,000 check, and he stayed on, became the CEO later on, and we rode that company to a nice success. But at the end of the day, there was a moment in time where we could have perished and maybe should have perished, but we didn't, you know, because I stood up in front of the company and led during a crisis.
That's incredible. And it also shows, again, going back to what we talked about as far as values with leadership and valuing your people, being able to come through and hold strong to a promise that you didn't even make shows a lot about caring about the people who are working for you. We're running low on time, so I would love to dive into some of these audience questions that have come through, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay, the first one, do entrepreneurs of faith and character always or almost always win in the marketplace, or do they lose out by insisting on integrity?
So I always will say that you will never lose by being a person of integrity. And in fact, at the end of the day, I would say, I'm not going to paint, this picture that just because you are a person of integrity that you're going to survive. That's not the case. In fact, in one of the good books that I adhere to, it says there's a law irrevocably decreed in the heavens before the foundations of this world, upon which all blessings are predicated. When we obtain any blessing from God, it is by obedience to that law upon which it is predicated. So I liken that to the law of gravity. If you jump off a cliff, and don't have a parachute or a hang glider or something, that certain death is on the way. So if you don't follow correct principles, no matter how much integrity you have, you will falter. But what I am saying is that you can't really build a great company without integrity. And for me, at the end of my life, I will not try counting what's in my piggy bank as a measure of my success. It will be, did I maintain the values that were important to me in life, throughout life, even in adverse situations like the one that I described. And I just think that that's critical to gain the trust of everyone. You can look at companies like, some of these are going to date me a little bit, but WorldCom, Enron. I could go through a whole list of current ones, how integrity caused their implosion. And I'll just tell you that nobody likes to work for somebody dishonest, and they will see it and they will talk about it behind your back. On the other hand, when you show integrity, they will follow you into war and into battle during the most difficult of times because they trust you.
Okay. You mentioned earlier Startup Leadership as a book.
Yep.
What other book suggestions do you have about leadership or decision making?
Some of the business books that I have a hard time remembering names, so forgive me if they don't pop out of my brain immediately here. Simon Sinek has some great books on leadership that I think are really helpful, that speak to the why. Maxwell is another one that has a book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, that I think is important. There are a lot of sales books that I like The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino, or one that I always talk about. Shoot. Hang on, I'm going to go to my bookcase. There's Spin Selling by Neil Rackham. That was one of my favorites. Tribal Leadership, I think, is really important. One called Super Bosses that I like. There's one on goal setting that I really like. That's brand new. I can't remember the name right off the bat. Anyway, tons of good books. I think you can find a lot of them by just Googling and saying, what is the best book on X? And you'll see the trend. You'll see the trends.
Okay, we might have to just get a list of some of your favorites to add to some of ours and send it out. Let's see. Last question. Has social media been a part of the success of the companies you have started?
Yes. Mostly, though, my last company, Almaty. Actually, it was kind of crazy how we create our branding and marketing guy created a fictitious character. I'll just call him Johnny the Tower, but it wasn't that. And this guy had a following of about 40,000 followers. People wanted to buy the site, and there were so many different things that this person did for our company relative to social media that were big, that were important. And so, yes, that's today. You can't build a great company without a big social media following. And back in the day, even just like in 2000, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, when I was building one of my companies, heck, we used the yellow pages, we used guerrilla marketing, we used signs, we used billboards, we used, the lettering on our trucks and everything. It was like, we were like as well known as UPS. But then, it got out of the marketplace and was running the Center for Entrepreneurship for quite a while. And I went back and, 2015 to run my startup Omadi for a couple of years, get it up and going, raise the capital and so forth. And it was almost like Rip Van Winkle, I'd been asleep for 20 years and woken up and said, wow, who moved my cheese? This is like unbelievable, the change in the employees and in social media and everything. And so there was a lot of learning. Social media is big today, Bree, and you've got to have experts, people that really understand the voice of the customer and customer personas, and you really have to design your whole marketing, PR, and branding around it.
I agree. I completely agree. Social media is my forte. That's what I love, and I'm with you on that. I agree.
Yeah,
Last question. This is sorry.
And you're the best, Ree.
Thank you. Last question. This is the one we ask every featured founder that comes on to RevU. What is something fun that your success has allowed you to do?
So for me, it's travel. Even though I like living in a nice place, and some of the other perks of success in entrepreneurship, and I will have to tell you that one of the greatest perks and blessings and privileges is giving back, and that's what I did for 10 years at Brigham Young, and what I've done with other organizations like Mentors International. That has been huge to me. Far more important than making a lot of money, is what that was allowed me to be able to do to make a difference. But the fun part is traveling. Marilyn and I love to travel, and we have a goal to go to 100 countries. So far we're at 73, and we would have been probably at 80 this year, but COVID kind of put a dent in all of that. But we'll get back to that, and we'll finish that goal of traveling to 100 different countries. We love to travel. It renews our relationship. We like to learn and just experience things together as a couple and with friends. So traveling, that's it, Bree.
That's so fun. That's so fun. Well, I hope you guys hit that 100 mark very soon. Thank you for being with us today, Scott. We're very, very grateful. Darren, we're going to hand it back over to you.